A paramount aspect of any great shonen anime are the lock-in episodes. The lock-in episodes, as their name would imply, are these rare but important episodes, crucial episodes of any given anime where everything comes together and, well, locks in. They're the episodes where every single person involved, from the writers to the animators to the sound designers to the composers to the VAs to the marketers to the fucking unpaid Twitter nerds who glaze this shit online for the love of the game, the agenda pushers. They're the episodes where all these different factions that shape a show's existence come together like the Avengers. They come together like Prime Deck and Prime Bach in order to put forth a show, put forth an experience that is of noticeably higher quality than what you would usually get from said show. Welcome back to Week Speak, the series where I talk about weekly anime that I enjoyed watching over the past 7 days. And in this week's installment, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's pretty clear what we gotta talk about, bro. We gotta talk about this most recent episode of My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia Season 8. Episode 3. This episode of My Hero Academia is without a doubt, and I say this with no hyperbole in my mouth. Pause. My Hero Academia Season 8 Episode 3 is the single greatest piece of content to ever come out of the My Hero Academia franchise. It is the absolute peak of that which is My Hero Academia, and frankly, it's about damn time, bro. I spoke about this in my last week's speak, but being a My Hero fan has been hard, bro. Like, being a genuine My Hero defender through the ups and downs of this series is probably more painful than losing your day one mans to the fentanyl crisis. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna keep it a full stack right now. As a manga reader who had experienced this part of the story a few years ago, I was entirely prepared to be let down. I was entirely prepared for the anime to kind of fumble the bag just like they did with Deku v Shiggy Part 1, my favorite part of the manga. And yeah, I mean, that sort of disappointment is just kind of one of those things I had come to accept about this series, right? And I'm not saying that in the sense that I think My Hero is bad by any means, okay? I still think that even at its worst, it's an above average anime. I'm more so just saying that, you know, when you take into account the fact that the manga is like probably one of, if not the most skillfully illustrated manga in Jump history, hell, in manga history, it can be kind of a bummer when the anime doesn't live up to that standard, especially when the first 3 seasons of the series managed to do the manga its due justice pretty damn well. Anywho, all that aside, after years and years of disappointment as a My Hero fan, I'm sure you can imagine my surprise coming into this most recent episode, right? Because like I said before, this episode managed to not only meet the standard set by the manga, but in my humble opinion, this episode went ahead and surpassed that standard by a pretty wide margin in order to create an experience that was damn near a fucking movie, bro. I mean, let's just keep it a full and honest stack right now. But yeah, I think I've given enough of a prelude to this episode, and so I really just want to jump into the episode itself. I want to talk about the quality, I want to talk about the themes, I want to talk about the squabbles, I want to talk about the GOAT, I want to talk about the GOAT, super explosion murder god dynamite, you dig? And so yeah, without any further ado, let's pretend I had a cool transition tagline and jump right into the episode. Alright, so this episode picks up not a second later than where the previous episode left off. Deku and Shigaraki are still tied in deadlock, neither of them able to move from their current position due to their stalemate. All Might, on the other hand, that fight isn't going nearly as swimmingly, at least not for the good guys, that is. You see, All Might is basically assed out after being hit with the blood curdle quirk that All For One stole from Stain, and now that All Might is finally physically unable to move his body and fight back, All For One basically has free reign over All Might's fate. This, of course, is terrible news for All Might, you, me, the millions of people watching in universe, and yeah, this sucks for basically anyone who doesn't want to live a future full of oppression and agony. Anywho, as All Might is about to get his torso ripped in half like a fucking corner store chicken wing, an explosion rings off in the distance, right? A firework erupts atop the coffin in the sky, and just in the nick of time, just as all hope was dissolving worldwide, the super explosion murder god himself wakes up with the toughest revival scene since Prime Jesus back in year 1, or whenever he did his whole 3 days thing. Now in a few moments we're going to talk about this revival a bit more in depth, right? We're going to really dig into the themes and whatnot, you know, what it means for his character, all that nerd shit, so on and so forth. But before we get into that, we gotta get into the hype shit, bro, because when I tell you that this moment may have been the toughest tag team moment amongst the toughest tag team moments. All right, so peep, after posing for the hose for a few seconds, you know, just soaking up that limited time revival aura that you can only unlock during the 15 seconds immediately after you escape death, Bakugo looks down at the battlefield where Deku is squabbling Shigaraki. Incidentally, at the same time that Bakugo is looking down at Deku, Deku is also looking back up at Bakugo, right? The two of them lock eyes, and look, bro, there's a certain like wavelength that develops between two niggas after they spend a shit ton of time together, right? I think it might be another time-based phenomena, you dig? But after you spend a certain amount of time around that one homie, it's almost like a non-verbal line of communication is established where you and that homie can look at each other, can lock eyes with one another, and just immediately lock in, bro. Immediately know exactly what type of time the other homie is on, irrespective of whether or not any actual words were exchanged vocally. Personally, I call this the lock-in frequency, okay? You may have experienced the lock-in frequency in your own life with your own homeboys, homegirls, or home slices. But yeah, in this moment, both Deku and Bakugo are tapped into the lock-in frequency, and without exchanging so much as a peep, the two of them proceed to get busy, working in perfect tandem as if they already knew what type of time the other homeboy was on. On one end, we got Bakugo, right? He jumps off the coffin in the sky, full swan dives off that motherfucker and makes his way down to Deku. Deku, on the other hand, he prepares for Bakugo's arrival by yeeting Shigaraki across the landscape, right? He straight flings that nigga to free up one hand. Animation going crazy right now, by the way, but after King Bak and Lord Deck clasp their hands together, you know, dap each other up, hey, I'm glad you alive, bro, type dap. But following this dap, Deku proceeds to put his body on the line again because, I mean, that's kind of just what he does. Bro does not care about his own personal well-being, but he proceeds to put his body on the line by activating gear shift to gain more inertia. And with the combined power of Deku's one-for-all gear shift and Bakugo's awakened explosion quirk, the two of them zing Bakugo across the battlefield at Mach fuck all speed so that he can go and hopefully save All Might. Now for a moment, I want to talk about the idea of fate, right? And how 𝙏𝙖 as a series utilizes the concept of fate in its own storytelling, because as someone who isn't too fond of fate-based narratives, I do find myself uniquely appreciating how 𝙏𝙖 approaches fate compared to other series, other anime in particular. And yeah, I want to speak on that topic for a bit. You see, personally, I would consider myself, I guess, fate agnostic, right? Like, I don't believe in fate, I don't disbelieve in fate. I guess I just think it doesn't really matter either way. The way I see it, if fate doesn't exist and we truly have free will, cool, we have free will. If fate does exist and we don't have free will and we're walking down some predestined path, I still don't really give a damn, because fate can only really be observed in hindsight. We can only really say, this was my destiny. We can't, you know, look into the future and say that something is our destiny with absolute certainty. And so, as far as our human experience is concerned in the IRL world, whether or not fate exists, again, in my opinion, doesn't matter if you're not like super in your head about it. Now in the My Hero world, on the other hand, fate does exist, right? Like, fate is a genuine observable phenomena that individuals like Sir Night-Eye can somehow tap into. And normally, personally, I would hate this aspect of any given series, because to me, fate-based narratives, unless really, really well done like AOT or some shit, kinda make a series feel hollow. Like, I get the feeling of like, oh, if this nigga was destined for this outcome anyway, if he was the second coming of Vishnu all along, then why the fuck did I even watch the path to this point? Nothing that I watched actually mattered. No struggle was an actual struggle. No triumph was an actual triumph, because at the end of the day, it was gonna happen anyway. Honestly, it might just be my like rugged American individualism coming out. Like, I've noticed that over here, we tend to like the idea that we're in control of our destiny, and you know, that's reflected in a lot of our media tastes. Whereas, you know, in a lot of anime, Japanese media, they tend to ascribe more so to this idea of like a sort of larger universal harmony where everything has its set place, and Yeah, now that I'm vocalizing it aloud, I'm kind of realizing that this is just basically the difference between Eastern and Western religious tropes. But yeah, armchair philosophy aside, because I'm getting sidetracked now. But what I was trying to get at as far as my hero is concerned is the fact that I like how my hero uses fate, because although fate is a confirmed force that affects how things play out in this universe, it's also confirmed in episodes like this one that fate can be obstructed and changed by the strength of the human will. I don't know, I think it's a good take on fate that's like a good middle ground between the two cultures, kind of like how My Hero itself is a good take on superheroes between the two cultures. Yeah, you get the idea. Anywho, now that we've weeded all the non-turbo dorks out of this video with that totally necessary yap on fate and whatnot, let's talk about Bakugo. So Bakugo, as the literal embodiment of bending fate to the will of humans, ends up saving All Might, right? He flies across the city in this explosive cacophony of colors and just zing, grabs that boy All Might so fast that even All For One himself is blitzed, right? Even All For One has no idea what the hell is going on right now. Side note, by the way, I know All Might's neck bone gotta be hurting, bro. I know All Might's neck bone gotta be sizzling, bro, because look at the way Bakugo folded this nigga's neck, man. Look at the way he whiplashed this nigga and got his whole spinal curled up like some jumbo shrimp. Absolutely abysmal work. But yeah, after saving his mentor, Bakugo and All Might take refuge atop a building a few miles down the road so that, even if only for a few minutes, they can catch their breath away from All For One. Now, the scene that occurs atop this building, right? The scene that takes place between Bakugo, All Might, and 𝙏𝙖𝙡, who, you know, was chilling in Bakugo's body this whole time. Like, I know that nigga probably queasy as hell after being spun around gear shift style. But this particular scene, I would say that this particular scene is the most important scene in the entire episode. It may not be the flashiest scene, okay? It damn sure isn't the hypest scene, by God, no, but I think it's the most important. What is that beeping? Shit about to piss me off, bro. But this particular scene, I would say that this particular scene is the most important scene in the entire episode, because it's this scene right here that ties Bakugo's character arc into a full circle. Bakugo's character arc, as I personally read it or interpret it, has always been like an inverse of Midoriya's character arc, where Midoriya's narrative is the story of someone with a hero's heart going through external physical struggles in order to embody heroism. Bakugo's narrative is the story of a child born with the hero's strength, having to get his heart right, having to do the inner work necessary to truly embody the ideals of heroism that he looks up to in All Might. Throughout the whole story, we followed Bakugo in his battle against his ego, right? Starting at the very beginning of the story where he refused to acknowledge anyone that wasn't himself, over to Kamino where, you know, his ego was shot down by the guilt that he had for quote unquote ending All Might, over to the fallout of that ego death, which was the squabble against Deku that one night, over to him learning about One For All and having to rebuild his sense of self in a way that wasn't so self-centered, and him rebuilding that sense of self to such an insane degree that he was willing to sacrifice his life for Deku, the kid who he couldn't even bring himself to acknowledge at the beginning of the story, over to his actual verbal apology for the way that he treated Deku, over to his death, which I think is symbolic of like the death of the old Bakugo, and now over to his rebirth, where he is, in both strength and mindset, a way stronger hero than he has ever been before. I mean, think about it, bro. The Bakugo that stands before us right now, the boy that was once driven by pure selfish ego, who was all me, now stands before us, literally held together by another hero, shout out 𝙏𝙖𝙡. He literally stands before us, having saved All Might due in part to the strength of another hero, shout out Deku. And it's only at this point, the point where he's shed his ego, the point where he's truly a hero inside and out, it's at this point that we see All Might acknowledge Bakugo as a worthy successor in the same way that he did Deku in the very beginning of the series, by offering up a piece of his strength, by offering up a piece of himself to help Bakugo during the battle that lie ahead. I think seeing Bakugo smile after being acknowledged by All Might, seeing him crack that first genuine crooked smile that we've seen from him in the whole series, that truly was a sight to behold, man. It truly was a sweet moment, and yeah, I just really fuck with how this series handled his character. Anywho, seeing as though Bakugo has now shed his childish ego and come out a better hero on the other side, who better for him to squabble than the literal embodiment of childish ego himself? The man who could have been ended the series if his childish ego wasn't standing between him and the bag. All For One. If you would have told me around season 1, season 2 that Bakugo versus All For One would be the endgame matchup, I would have been like, I'm not seeing it. But after seeing the way that their characters have developed respectively, or well, I mean seeing the way that Bakugo's character has developed respectively at least, because, you know, All For One hasn't developed worth a damn. But after seeing how Bakugo is developed, I think that having him fight All For One during the endgame is like the perfect way to tie his arc together nicely, because by putting pause on All For One, Bakugo is quite literally beating down ego. Anywho, let's get into the fight itself, right? So All For One, after getting All Might snagged out of his grasp by Bakugo, after having his moment ruined by Bakugo, is like, fuck it, I'll handle that later. I got bigger fish to fry right now. And he continues on his path to the battlefield where Deku and Shigaraki are fighting. Now at this point, All For One is kind of tilted, right? Things keep getting in the way of his plans. Pebbles, as he calls them, keeps getting in the way of his plans, and yeah, he's just not used to being on the back foot, right? He doesn't even know how to compute the concept of being at a disadvantage. It reaches a point after a while where it starts to seem like genuine delusion is setting in. Like, we get a look at All For One's inner monologue, and despite the shit that's going on in front of his face right before his very eyes, despite the fact that he was just speed blitzed by Bakugo, All For One still seems unable to recognize anyone as a genuine threat to him apart from All Might, Endeavor, and Tokoyami, oddly enough. Bakugo, on the other hand, he's on some whole other shit right now, bro. With the help of his newly awakened quirk, Bakugo is able to move fast enough to close the gap between All For One and himself at breakneck speed. He's able to fly across the whole battlefield, plus the length of however far All For One flew just now in a matter of seconds? Fractions of a second? I don't know, you gotta ask the power scalers about that one. But what I do know is that old boy was able to move fast enough to once again speed blitz All For One, catch him off guard, and this time palm that nigga face like a Spalding basketball and blast his shit from the roof of a building down to the ground floor of that same building off nothing but pure concussive explosion strength alone. Now All For One, he doesn't want that smoke with Bakugo no more. I think he copes by once again telling himself that Bakugo isn't worth his time, that Bakugo is nothing more than an annoyance to him, but honestly, I think that nigga All For One is just a bitch, bro. I think he's coping because he knows deep inside that he really doesn't want sparks with the super explosion murder god himself. In order to duck smoke, All For One takes off once again, this time propelling himself towards Shiggy and them at Mach speed. This nigga All For One is ducking smoke so hard that he's literally breaking the sound barrier off pure duckage. You can't tell me that this nigga's not a hoe, bruh. King Bak, on the other hand, he just takes this as a challenge, right? He takes this moment as an opportunity to surpass his limits even further, and with the help of the whole animation budget at his disposal, super explosion murder god Dynamite rockets himself forward in what is hands down the toughest cut of the whole episode. Hell, the toughest cut of the whole series so far. I don't think it's ridiculous to say that. We then see Bakugo blast across the city, right? At this point, with this new level of speed that he's unlocked, Bakugo easily catches up with All For One, who's once again caught entirely off guard by Bakugo's display of power. Whole time, we get a look at Bakugo himself, and Nephew is just over there absolutely tweaking, bro. Gang is getting high off his own explosions to the point where he's not even really in control of his body anymore. He's just letting off explosions haphazardly and ragdolling himself across the map, slamming through buildings like he can't even feel that shit. We get a look at Bakugo's parents, right? Pops is over there on some nervous shit talking about, no bro, I can't look, even though I guess to be fair, he did witness his son getting stabbed through the chest just a few minutes earlier, and so yeah, I can understand his distress. But Bakugo's mom, on the other hand, her fine ass, she's just looking at the screen with tears quivering on her eyelids because she knows deep inside, she knows damn well that her son is out there about to give smoke to the most vile villain that has ever lived, and I can only imagine how proud of a parent you must be while watching your son run 1v1 fade with the literal devil himself. Now at this point, All For One is raging, right? No more villain composure, no more villain swag, no more acting like everything and everybody is light work. He's over here screaming at the top of his lungs because Bakugo stepping in and ruining his plans reminds him of way back in the day when Kudo, aka All For One Vestige number 2, did the same thing by taking his brother away, by saving his brother. Bakugo hears this nigga screaming out Kudo's name, and he doesn't give a fuck about none of that shit, bro. He's like, Kudo? Bro, kudos to you, but my name is 𝙏𝙖𝙡𝙠 Bakugo. And I want you to think closely about what he called himself just now. I want you to think closely about the significance of him referring to himself with the name 𝙏𝙖 in the first place, because there's only one person that I know that calls Bakugo by the name of 𝙏𝙖. Anywho, thank you for watching. Stay blessed, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.